The war room on the Coalition flagship was filled with fear. Commander Zethka stood at the center of the massive chamber, his forearms shaking as he watched the holographic display. Red dots marked Kavari conquests across the galaxy. Dot represented billions of dead aliens and countless destroyed worlds. "They took the vegan colonies yesterday," reported Lieutenant Hessmore, her voice barely above a whisper. "The entire system fell in 6 hours. Our defense fleet didn't even slow them down." Zethka closed his eyes and tried to control his breathing. The Kavari Empire had been sweeping through space for 3 years now. Their biomechanical war machines could adapt to any weapon, heal from any damage, and seemed to grow stronger with each victory. Every species that faced them was either destroyed or enslaved. "Sir, incoming message from the High Council," announced Communications Officer Veltan. "They want an immediate status report." The commander nodded grimly. He knew what the Council wanted to hear, but he could only give them the truth. The Coalition Defense Force was losing badly. Soon there would be nothing left to defend. The Council Chamber was a marvel of alien architecture. Representatives from 47 different worlds sat in a massive circular room that could hold thousands. Some breathed oxygen, others methane. Some had tentacles, others had wings. But today, they all shared the same expression of hopeless terror. Elder Vosnell, of the Centauri delegation, was the first to speak. His people were known for their wisdom and calm nature. But even he looked scared. "Commander Zethka, please, give us your assessment of our current situation." Zethka activated his personal hologram projector. The display showed the galaxy with vast red areas marking Kavari territory. The red zones were growing larger every day. "Honorable Council members, I must report that our conventional military forces have proven completely ineffective against the Kavari war machine," he began. "In the past month alone, we have lost 17 major systems and 43 defensive fleets. Our casualty reports indicate over 50 billion civilian deaths." A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Even though they had all known the war was going badly, hearing the actual numbers was devastating. "What about our new weapon systems?" asked Counselor Prime Rex of the Andromedon Alliance. "The quantum disruptors were supposed to be able to penetrate their bioarmor." Zethka shook his head sadly. "The Kavari machines adapted to quantum weapons within hours of first contact. Their technology seems to learn and evolve in real time. Every weapon we develop becomes useless almost immediately." "Then what do you suggest?" demanded Counselor Himtok of the Aquatic Worlds. Her tentacles were curled tight with anxiety. "Should we simply surrender to these monsters?" "There may be one option," Zethka said quietly, "but it is dangerous, and many of you will not like it." The chamber fell completely silent. Every alien eye, optical sensor, and sensory organ focused on the commander. "We could contact the Deathworlders." Reaction was immediate and explosive. Council members began shouting in dozens of different languages. Some demanded explanations, others protested that the idea was insane. A few simply fainted from shock. Elder Vosnell raised his hand for silence. It took several minutes for the chaos to die down. "Commander, surely you cannot be serious." "Deathworlders are barely civilized. They come from worlds so dangerous that simply surviving requires them to become natural killers." "Exactly," Zethka replied, "which is why they might be able to fight the Kavari when we cannot." The Counselor Himtok's tentacles were now twisted into knots of fear. "But Deathworlders are unstable, violent, unpredictable. The few species we know of that qualify are either extinct from fighting each other or have been quarantined for the safety of the galaxy." "There is one exception," Zethka said carefully. "The humans?" Another wave of shocked murmurs swept through the chamber. Most council members had heard of Earth, but only as a cautionary tale. The planet was classified as Class 12 hazardous, meaning it was one of the most dangerous worlds in known space. "I have reviewed their planetary survey files," Zethka continued. "Earth experiences extreme weather variations that would kill most of our species, massive storms that can level cities, earthquakes that crack continents, temperature changes that swing from deadly heat to killing cold. The gravity is so intense that most of us would be crushed just standing on the surface, and the native life forms? Asked Elder Vosnell, though he clearly didn't want to know the answer. Terrifying. The planet is filled with aggressive predators. Creatures that hunt in packs, kill for sport, or can grow to enormous sizes. The oceans contain monsters larger than our starships. Even the plants can be deadly. Counselor Himtok shuddered. And humans evolved in this nightmare environment. Just evolved, Zethka said grimly. They became the apex predators. They hunted the other dangerous species to extinction, or domesticated them. They survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and asteroid impacts. And perhaps most importantly, they learned to fight each other. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. A species that could survive on such a world would indeed be formidable warriors. But are they civilized enough to be reasoned with? Asked Primerex. Can we trust them not to simply take over once the Kavari are defeated? According to our limited contact reports, humans have developed a complex civilization despite their violent nature, Zethka explained. They have art, science, philosophy. But they have also spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare against opponents who think exactly like they do. Elder Vosnell considered this carefully. What do we know about their military capabilities? It's very little. They have only recently developed interstellar flight and have avoided contact with the greater galactic community. But their few exploration ships that we have detected are built like flying fortresses. Heavily armed, heavily armored, designed to fight in conditions that would destroy our vessels. And you believe these Deathworlders could succeed where our combined fleets have failed? Asked HRIM-TOK.ZTHK was quiet for a long moment before answering. I believe they are our only hope. Kavari have never faced an enemy like them. Every species they have conquered was peaceful by nature, preferring diplomacy to warfare. Humans are the opposite. They seem to view conflict as a natural state of existence. The council members looked at each other nervously. The idea of asking for help from creatures who thrived on violence was terrifying, but the alternative was extinction. If we contact them, Elder Vosnell said slowly, how do we know they will help us rather than join the Kavari? Because according to their psychological profiles, humans have a strong protective instinct toward weaker species. They seem to view themselves as guardians rather than conquerors. But we must be careful how we approach them. If they perceive us as threats, they will respond accordingly. The debate continued for hours. Some council members argued that contacting the humans was too dangerous. Others insisted that they had no choice. Finally, Elder Vosnell called for a vote. All in favor of contacting the human Deathworlders for military assistance? The vote was close, but the motion passed. The galaxy's most peaceful species had just voted to ask the most dangerous species. They knew for help in a war they could not win alone. Commander Zethka was tasked with making contact. As he prepared the transmission, he wondered if they were making the biggest mistake in galactic history, or the only decision that could save them all. The message would be sent to a small space station orbiting Earth's moon, where human military forces had established their first interstellar command post. The transmission was formal and polite, carefully crafted to avoid seeming threatening or desperate. But what the council didn't know was that Earth had been monitoring their communications for months. The humans already knew about the Kavari threat, and they had been waiting for someone to ask for their help. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when you wakened sleeping predators. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair aboard Luna Station, reading the alien message for the third time. The Coalition's request for military consultation was polite and carefully worded, but Jake could read between the lines. These aliens were desperate. What do you think, Lisa? He asked his second-in-command, Lieutenant Colonel Lisa Grant. She was studying the tactical data the aliens had included with their message. Lisa shook her head as she watched the combat footage. They fight like frightened children, Jake. Look. At this, she pointed to the holographic display showing a recent battle between Coalition forces and the Kavari. The moment the enemy appears, they form defensive shells around their evacuation ships and wait to be attacked. Jake watched the footage carefully. The Coalition ships were beautiful, sleek vessels that moved like dancers through space. When the Kavari war machines appeared, the alien ships immediately retreated into protective formations that made them sitting targets. "They have good ships and decent weapons," Jake observed, "but they have no killer instinct. They're trying to minimize casualties instead of winning the war." "Exactly," Lisa agreed. "And look at these Kavari machines. They're designed to terrorize as much as destroy. All those spikes and aggressive shapes, the way they move like hunting beasts, they're using fear as a weapon?" Jake smiled grimly. He had spent 20 years in Earth's military, fighting in conflicts from the Martian Rebellion to the Europa mining wars. He knew how to deal with bullies who relied on intimidation. "Send a message to Admiral Hayes," he ordered. "Tell her we're going to show these aliens what humans learned from 10,000 years of fighting each other." 3 days later, the human fleet arrived at Rally Point Zarian. The Coalition commanders watched in amazement as the human ships dropped out of hyperspace. Where Coalition vessels were graceful and elegant, human ships looked like flying weapons platforms. They were angular, heavily armored, and bristling with gun turrets. Admiral Patricia Hayes materialized as a hologram on the Coalition flagship's bridge. Commander Zethka and his officers stared at her with fascination and fear. Humans were taller than most alien species, and they moved with a controlled grace that reminded everyone of apex predators. Admiral Hayes, Commander Zethka began carefully, "We are grateful for your assistance. Perhaps you would like to observe our standard engagement protocols before now." Hayes interrupted, studying the tactical display with cold efficiency. "Your protocols are the reason you're losing this war." "Captain Rodriguez, begin Hunter Protocol 7. Before the Coalition could object, the USS Defiance broke from formation and accelerated toward the edge of the system. Captain Danny Rodriguez had commanded the ship through 3 major conflicts, and he understood that sometimes the best way to protect something was to attack the threat directly. "Admiral, what is your ship doing?" asked Commander Zethka nervously. "The Kavari fleet will emerge from hyperspace in that sector. Your captain is flying directly into danger." Hayes smiled coldly. "Exactly where he needs to be." The Coalition officers exchanged worried glances. These humans seemed to have no sense of self-preservation. They were deliberately seeking out combat, instead of avoiding it. When the Kavari war fleet emerged from hyperspace 30 minutes later, found exactly what they expected: a Coalition defensive formation protecting civilian evacuation ships. But there was something strange about the setup. The formation seemed incomplete. Long-range sensors detected only a fraction of the ships that intelligence reports had indicated. War Commander Thekvar studied the tactical display from his flagship's bridge. Something felt wrong, but he couldn't identify what it was. "It's an unknown vessel approaching from Grid 7, reported his tactical officer. "Appears to be alone." On the main screen, a single human ship was accelerating directly toward the Kavari fleet. It was smaller than their war machines, but moved with aggressive purpose. One ship. Dekvar clicked his mandibles in amusement. These new allies of the Coalition must be even more foolish than the others. "Open a channel." The communication came through clearly. "Unknown vessel, you will surrender immediately or be destroyed. You cannot hope to defeat the might of the Kavari Empire with a single ship." Captain Rodriguez's response was not words, but action. The USS Defiance fired a spread of kinetic penetrators at near-light speed. The metal slugs punched through Kavari shields like they were made of tissue paper, tearing massive holes in the lead war machine. The Kavari were shocked. Their biomechanical armor was supposed to be impenetrable.
Always.
No Coalition weapon had ever caused that kind of damage so quickly. But instead of pressing the attack, the human ship suddenly went dark. It stopped transmitting on all frequencies, powered down its engines, and seemed to disappear from sensors entirely. "Where did it go?" demanded Thekvar. "Find that ship." The Kavari fleet spread out, searching frantically for their mysterious attacker. Their sensors swept space in all directions, but the human vessel had simply vanished. Rodriguez and his crew drifted silently through space, running on minimal life support only. Every other system was powered down completely. This was a tactic learned from submarine warfare back on Earth: strike hard, disappear completely, then let the enemy's paranoia do the rest of the work. Sir Kavari ships are spreading their formation to search for us, whispered Lieutenant Emma Clark from her position at the sensor station. They're breaking their defensive coordination, Rodriguez smiled. Perfect, signaled the Coalition fleet. Phase 2 begins now. Suddenly, Coalition ships appeared from behind asteroids and sensor shadows throughout the system. But instead of forming their usual defensive clusters, they followed the tactical plan the humans had given them. They struck at the Kavari flanks in coordinated groups, hit hard, then faded away before the enemy could respond effectively. War Commander Lakfar watched in growing confusion as his perfectly organized fleet was being torn apart by enemies that refused to stand still and fight properly. Every time his forces moved to engage one group of Coalition ships, another group would appear somewhere else and attack his rear formations. This is not how warfare is conducted, he muttered to his tactical officer. Where is honor? Where is the decisive battle? His officer had no answer. The Kavari had conquered 17 sectors using overwhelming force and intimidation. Enemies had always either fled in terror or stood their ground and been destroyed. But these new tactics were completely outside their experience. The human ship reappeared without warning, striking at a Kavari flanking group that had extended too far from the main formation. Rodriguez and his crew hit them with everything. They had crippling 2 war machines before vanishing again into the darkness. Sir, we're receiving communications from our damaged vessels, reported the tactical officer nervously. They report that the human weapons seem to ignore our adaptive defenses completely. Deathvar studied the damage reports with growing concern. Kavari biomechanical systems were designed to learn from each attack and develop countermeasures. But the human weapons were so simple and brutal that there was nothing to adapt to. Metal slugs fired at enormous speeds would always punch through armor if they were big enough and fast enough. And their tactics? He asked. Completely unpredictable, sir. They strike without warning, inflict maximum damage, then retreat before we can retaliate. They coordinate with Coalition forces, but seem to follow no standard military doctrine we have ever encountered. Meanwhile, aboard the USS Shadow, Lieutenant Emma Clark was monitoring Kavari communications from her stealth reconnaissance ship. The vessel was specially designed for intelligence gathering and was virtually invisible to enemy sensors. Admiral, she reported to Hayes over an encrypted channel, the Kavari are getting frustrated. Their formation is starting to break down. As individual commanders try to chase our attack groups, Hayes nodded with satisfaction. Phase 2 complete. Signal all units to begin Phase 3. It's time to show them what pack hunters can really do. The battle continued for 6 more hours, but the outcome was never in doubt after the first 30 minutes. The Kavari had expected to face the usual Coalition tactics, defensive formations that could be overwhelmed with sufficient force. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to play by the established rules of galactic warfare. Human-led Coalition forces struck from unexpected angles, used the environment as a weapon, and coordinated their attacks with surgical precision. Every engagement was perfectly timed to support the others, creating a synergistic effect that multiplied their effectiveness. When the surviving Kavari ships finally retreated into hyperspace, they left behind a battlefield littered with the wreckage of what had once been considered invincible war machines. War Commander Deathvar sent an emergency message to Kavari High Command. As his damaged flagship limped away from the disaster, the Coalition has acquired new allies. These Deathworlders do not fight like any species we have previously encountered. Recommend immediate tactical reassessment before engaging human forces again, but it was already too late. Word of the human victory was spreading throughout the galaxy, and the Kavari Empire was about to discover that their reign of terror had awakened. Something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. War Commander Deathvar had never experienced fear before the humans arrived. In 17 sectors of conquest, his biomechanical war machines had never faced an enemy that refused to be intimidated. The Kavari Empire had built their entire military strategy around one simple principle: show overwhelming force and watch the enemy break. But these Deathworlders were different. They seemed to grow more dangerous the longer the fighting continued. Sir, long-range sensors show no human vessels in the immediate area, reported his tactical officer Yethnal. The young Kavari's voice shook slightly as he spoke. Kavar studied the holographic display with growing frustration. For the past week, his fleet had been under constant attack from enemies that appeared from nowhere, struck with deadly precision, then vanished completely. The humans had turned warfare into a deadly game of hide and seek. "They are still out there," he muttered, his mandibles clicking nervously. "Deploy seeker drones across the entire system. Set them to search for any energy signature, no matter how small." "Yes, sir," Yethnal replied. "But, sir, our previous drone searches have found nothing. How can an entire fleet simply disappear?" Before Kavar could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the flagship. Emergency lights bathed the bridge in red as something massive struck their hull with tremendous force. "Report," Kavar demanded. "Sir, we have hull breaches on decks 7 through 12, came the panicked reply. "But sensors show no attacking vessels. Whatever hit us came from nowhere." Through the bridge viewport, VFOR watched something that should have been impossible. A human figure in powered armor had landed on their outer hull. The soldier moved with swift efficiency, planting what looked like a simple metallic device on the ship's communication array. "Boarding party?" gasped Yethnal. "But that is impossible. No species attempts boarding actions against a battleship of this size." The human soldier activated a personal jetpack and disappeared back into space before anyone could react. Seconds later, the metallic device began broadcasting a signal that jammed all of the flagship's communications. "Sir, we have lost contact with the rest of the fleet," reported the communications officer. "All external communications are down." Similar attacks were happening across the Kavari formation. Human Special Forces teams had somehow approached through empty space and were systematically disabling command and control systems throughout the fleet. Sergeant Carl Baker led one of these teams as they approached their target, a Kavari Heavy cruiser that served as a sector command ship. His team consisted of 6 soldiers, all volunteers from Earth's Special Operations Command. "Remember the briefing?" Baker whispered into his comm unit. "These biomechanical ships can adapt to weapon damage, but they cannot adapt to having their computer systems physically disconnected." Corporal Nina Walsh, his second-in-command, smiled grimly inside her helmet. "Just like taking out a communications tower back on Earth, except this one shoots back." Baker's team landed on the Kavari ship's hull and moved quickly toward their target. The aliens had never designed their vessels to repel boarders because no civilized species had ever attempted such a primitive tactic. But humans were not civilized by galactic standards. They came from a world where warfare had been refined over thousands of years of constant conflict. Boarding actions were just one of many brutal tactics that peaceful species had never needed to learn. The metallic devices the humans planted were elegantly simple. They created electromagnetic fields that disrupted the biomechanical systems the Kavari relied on. Within minutes, entire sections of the enemy fleet were operating blind and deaf. Back on the USS Defiance, Captain Danny Rodriguez coordinated the assault with grim satisfaction. His bridge crew worked with the smooth efficiency of people who had trained for exactly this type of operation. "That's the problem with species that rely on fear," he told his tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Pete Wilson. "They never learn to fight an enemy that simply refuses to be afraid." Rodriguez had grown up in the gang wars of New Detroit, where showing fear meant instant death. Later, he had served in 3 interplanetary conflicts, where human forces faced impossible odds, and won through sheer determination. The idea of surrendering or retreating simply because the enemy looked scary was foreign to him. "Sir, Coalition forces are reporting successful coordination of the new attack patterns," Wilson reported. "They're actually starting to enjoy this." Rodriguez nodded. The human tactical advisors had spent weeks teaching Coalition crews how to fight aggressively. Instead of defensively, it had not been easy. Most alien species were naturally peaceful and had to overcome thousands of years of evolutionary programming to become effective warriors. But fear was a powerful motivator. When faced with extinction, even the most peaceful species could learn. To fight, Admiral Patricia Hayes watched the battle unfold from her command ship, the USS Darwin. The vessel was named after the human scientist who had discovered the principle of natural selection. It seemed appropriate for a ship designed to prove that humans were the ultimate survivors. Phase 3 is proceeding successfully, reported her operations officer, Commander Frank Miller. Kavari fleet coordination has dropped by 60%. Individual ships are operating independently instead of as a unified force. Hayes smiled coldly. This was exactly what human strategists had predicted. The Kavari relied heavily on centralized command structures. Once those were disrupted, their individual commanders had no experience operating without detailed orders. From above, begin Phase 4, she ordered. Signal all coalition forces to implement the Darwin Protocol. The Darwin Protocol was humanity's ultimate contribution to galactic warfare. It was based on a simple biological principle that had served Earth's species well for millions of years. Adapt faster than your enemy, or die. Lieutenant Colonel Lisa Grant, now serving as tactical coordinator for the combined human coalition. Fleet activated the final phase of their strategy. Her console displayed a real-time analysis of Kavari defensive patterns, updated every few seconds as the battle evolved. All units, the enemy is adapting to our current attack vectors, she announced over the fleet communication system. Implementing Tactical Shift 7 Alpha, Coalition vessels, execute flanking maneuver Delta, human fast attack units. Initiate. Harassment pattern, Omega. The beauty of the Darwin Protocol was its unpredictability. Every few minutes, the entire tactical approach would change completely. Just as the Kavari began to adapt to one type of attack, they would find themselves facing something entirely different. War Commander Vetch Var watched his fleet dissolve into chaos with growing horror. His biomechanical systems were designed to learn from each engagement and develop countermeasures. But these humans changed their tactics so frequently that adaptation became impossible. Sir, the human vessels have changed formation again, reported Yethnal desperately. Now they are using coalition ships as forward scouts, while their heavy units provide long-range support. Dadvar studied the tactical display with growing unease. The humans had taken the coalition's elegant but ineffective fleet formations and restructured them into something that resembled the hunting patterns of packed predators, even more disturbing. The coalition crews were actually succeeding with these aggressive new tactics. Species that had been pacifists for thousands of years were now attacking with the coordination and ferocity of natural-born killers. How is this possible? He whispered. These creatures are turning sheep into wolves. His tactical officer had no answer. The Kavari had conquered dozens of species, but they had never faced an enemy that could teach other species to fight effectively. It was like watching a virus spread through the galaxy, turning peaceful civilizations into warrior cultures. Captain Michelle Carter, commanding the fast attack vessel USS Predator, led her squadron in a coordinated strike against a Kavari heavy formation. Her ship, along with similar vessels commanded by officers like Captain Paul Davis and Captain Laura King, moved with the fluid precision of a wolf pack taking down much larger prey. Target their command ships first, Carter ordered over the squadron communication channel. Cut off the head and the body dies. The attack was perfectly timed with similar strikes throughout the battlefield. Dozens of human and coalition ships struck simultaneously at key points in the Kavari formation. Each assault was carefully coordinated to support the others, creating a synergistic effect that was far greater than the sum of its parts. The Kavari war machines, designed to intimidate and overpower, found themselves outmaneuvered by smaller, faster ships that attacked from unexpected angles and disappeared before retaliation was possible as his flagship systems failed around him. War Commander the Shetra realized that his empire had made a fatal error. They had awakened something that had been sleeping peacefully in a remote corner of the galaxy, something that turned warfare into an art form and taught others to do the same. These humans did not fight for territory or resources. They fought for survival, and they had spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to do it better than anyone else. The pack had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Kavari Empire had protocols for every type of warfare they had ever encountered. Fleet battles, siege tactics, biological weapons. Psychological warfare, their military computers contained detailed responses to thousands of different combat scenarios. What they did not have was a protocol for fighting an enemy that used their own environment as a weapon. Captain Steve Palmer stood on the bridge of the USS Horizon, studying the asteroid field that stretched across half the star system. His ship was designed for operations in dangerous space environments, and his crew had all grown up in places where nature tried to kill them every single day. "Target analysis complete, Captain," reported his navigator, Helen Brooks. She had been born on Europa, where a single mistake in calculating orbital mechanics meant death in the frozen vacuum of space. "We can cascade the entire field through their formation if we time the detonations correctly." Palmer nodded grimly. The Kavari fleet had taken position near the asteroid cluster, thinking the rocky debris would provide defensive cover. They were about to learn that what looked like protection to them looked like ammunition to humans. Chief Engineer Sam Parker, who had grown up in the dangerous mining colonies of the asteroid belt, was already calculating the complex physics involved. 17 primary asteroids, Captain. If we nudge them in the right sequence, the gravitational interactions will create a chain reaction that their computers cannot predict. The Kavari had made a fundamental error in judgment. They assumed that other species viewed asteroid fields the same way they did, as obstacles to be avoided or destroyed. But humans had lived and worked in such environments for generations. They understood that space debris was not just a hazard, it was a tool. War Commander Thakfar watched the human ships retreat deeper into the asteroid field with satisfaction. Finally, these Deathworlders were showing some sense of self-preservation. His biomechanical war machines were powerful enough to blast through any amount of rocky debris. "Pursue them," he ordered. "Do not let them escape into the asteroid maze. Destroy any rocks that block our path." His fleet moved forward confidently, weapons charging to clear a path through the floating mountains of stone and metal. The first few asteroids were destroyed easily, their debris scattered harmlessly into space, but the humans had not chosen their targets randomly. Each asteroid was positioned precisely to create the maximum amount of chaos when destroyed. The debris from the first explosion drifted into the path of the second asteroid, causing it to tumble unpredictably when the Kavari destroyed it. Lieutenant Maria Santos monitored the developing chaos from her position aboard the stealth ship USS Hunter. Her job was to track the cascade effect and provide real-time updates to the human fleet. "Debris field expanding as predicted," she reported to Captain Palmer. "Kavari computers are trying to model the collision patterns, but they are failing. To account for the random variables," Santos smiled, as she watched the enemy struggle with the three-dimensional puzzle of cascading destruction. The Kavari were trying to use mathematical models to predict the movement of millions of debris pieces. But they had no experience with truly chaotic systems. On Earth, humans dealt with hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions. They had learned that some forces of nature could not be controlled, only understood and worked with. The key was not to fight chaos, but to use it. "Third detonation sequence ready," reported Chief Parker. "This one should create a gravity well that pulls debris from the previous explosions into a spinning vortex." The Kavari fleet found itself caught in a three-dimensional storm of rocky debris that no computer could accurately model. Chunks of stone the size of buildings tumbled through space in patterns that seemed random, but were actually guided by the careful manipulation of gravitational forces. War Commander Thakfar stared at his tactical display in growing confusion. His ships were equipped with the most advanced targeting computers in the galaxy, but they could not predict where the next piece of deadly debris would come from. "Sir, we are taking heavy damage from asteroid impacts," reported his tactical officer. "Our point defense systems cannot track so many targets simultaneously." "Then destroy the entire field," Thakfar ordered desperately. "Use the planet crackers. Turn every asteroid into dust." But even as his ships began firing their most powerful weapons, the humans were already moving to the next phase of their plan. The USS Horizon and her sister ships navigated through the chaos as if they had been born to it, because in many ways they had been Captain Rodriguez. Commanding a joint human coalition task force from the USS Defiance, watched the Kavari struggle. With grim satisfaction, all units initiate final phase. It's time to show them what Deathworlders really learned from our planet. The final phase was called the Storm Protocol, named after the weather systems that had shaped human evolution for millions of years. Just as their ancestors had learned to survive in hurricanes and blizzards, modern humans had learned to fight in conditions that would paralyze other species. The human ships moved through the debris field like dancers, using the chaotic environment to mask their approach vectors. They struck at the confused Kavari formations from multiple directions simultaneously, then faded back into the storm of rocks and metal before retaliation was possible. Commander Lisa Zhang, veteran of the Europa Deep Space Campaign, led a squadron of fast attack ships in a coordinated assault on the Kavari rearguard. Her pilots had all grown up in environments where split-second timing meant the difference between life and death. "Remember, we use the chaos. We do not fight it," she told her squadron over the communication channel. "Let the debris hide us, guide us, protect us." The enemy sees obstacles where we see opportunities. The attack was devastating. Kavari ships that had survived the asteroid impacts found themselves under assault from enemies that seemed to appear out of the debris field itself. Human vessels would emerge from behind tumbling rocks, fire everything they had, then disappear back into the chaos before the enemy could respond. War Commander the Shavar realized with growing horror that his fleet was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that was using the environment itself as a weapon. Every tactical advantage his forces possessed was being turned against them. "Sir, our formation integrity has collapsed," reported his tactical officer with barely controlled panic. "Individual ships are unable to maintain coordination in the debris field. The humans are picking us off one by one." Var studied the tactical display and saw the truth. His biomechanical war machines were designed to fight in open space, where their superior firepower and armor could be brought to bear effectively. But in this chaotic environment, those advantages meant nothing. The humans had turned the battlefield into a three-dimensional maze where only they knew the rules. They moved through the deadly debris as if it was their natural habitat, striking from unexpected angles and vanishing before counterattacks could be organized. Captain Jack Sullivan, whose expertise in asymmetric warfare had proven invaluable, coordinated the final assault from his command ship USS Stormrider. His vessel was specifically designed for combat in hazardous environments. With reinforced hull plating and advanced navigation systems, "All units, the enemy is attempting to retreat to open space," he announced. "Do not let them escape the debris field. Keep them trapped in the chaos until their ships are disabled or destroyed." The human strategy was working perfectly. Fleet, once proud and unstoppable, was now scattered and confused. Individual ships tried desperately to escape the asteroid field, but human forces blocked every exit route. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Miller, monitoring the battle from Admiral Hayes' flagship, shook his head in amazement as he watched the tactical display. The Kavari are completely out of their element. They have no idea how to fight in an environment this chaotic. Admiral Hayes nodded grimly. "That's the difference between a species that evolved on a peaceful world and one that came from a planet that tried to kill them every single day. We learned to make chaos our ally." The battle continued for several more hours, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Kavari war machines, for all their technological superiority, could not adapt to fighting an enemy that had turned the battlefield itself into a weapon. As the last Kavari, ships were either destroyed or captured. War Commander Vekfar sent a final transmission to his superiors. His flagship was crippled and drifting, its biomechanical systems finally overwhelmed by the constant battering of debris impacts. "High Command, do not underestimate the human Deathworlders. They do not fight like civilized species. They use their environment as an extension of their military forces. They have turned space itself into their ally. Recommend immediate strategic withdrawal from all human-occupied sectors." But it was too late for warnings. Word of the human victory was already spreading throughout the galaxy, and species that had lived in fear of the Kavari Empire were beginning to understand that their salvation had come from the most unlikely source imaginable. The Deathworlders had been unleashed, and nothing would ever be the same. The Darwin Protocol was humanity's ultimate military doctrine. based on a simple principle that had served them well throughout their violent history: adapt or die, but never stop fighting. War Commander Thakvar was about to learn why this philosophy made humans the most dangerous species in the galaxy. His fleet was scattered across 3 star systems, broken and demoralized, after weeks of fighting an enemy that refused to follow any predictable pattern. Every time his forces adapted to one human tactic, the Deathworlders would shift to something completely different. "Sir, they have changed formation again," reported his tactical officer, Yethnal, his voice filled with exhaustion and fear. "Now, they are using coalition ships as forward scouts, while their heavy units provide long-range support from hidden positions." Thakvar studied the display with growing despair. The humans had taken the coalition's elegant but ineffective fleet formations and restructured them into something that resembled the hunting patterns of pack predators. Even more disturbing, the coalition crews were actually succeeding with these aggressive new tactics. "This is not possible," he whispered. "How can they turn pacifists into warriors so quickly?" But he already knew the answer. These humans did not just fight wars, they taught others how to fight wars. They spread their deadly knowledge like a virus, infecting every species they encountered with their understanding of conflict. Admiral Patricia Hayes coordinated the final assault from the command ship. It was, says Darwin. Her bridge crew included some of Earth's most experienced military minds. Officers who had learned warfare in the harshest schools imaginable. Colonel Ray Thompson, who had commanded forces during the brutal Mars Rebellion, monitored the tactical situation with cold efficiency. "The Kavari are trying to retreat to hyperspace," he reported. "Should we let them go?" He's considered the question carefully. Letting them escape might prevent further bloodshed, but it would also allow them to regroup and attack other worlds. The Coalition had asked for humanity's help, and humans had learned long ago that half measures in warfare only led to longer conflicts. Negative, she decided. If we let them leave, they will just come back with a bigger fleet. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is end a war decisively. Commander Lisa Zhang, a veteran of the Europa Deep Space Campaign, activated the fleet-wide communication system. All units implement final phase of Darwin Protocol. Show them what evolution in action really means. The final engagement took place in open space where there could be no doubt about the outcome. Kavari, despite their losses, still outnumbered the human coalition force by 3-1. Their biomechanical war machines were individually more powerful than any human ship, but numbers and individual strength meant less when facing an enemy that refused to follow predictable patterns. Captain Michelle Carter, commanding the fast attack vessel USS Predator, led the final charge. Her ship, along with similar vessels commanded by officers like Captain Paul Davis and Captain Laura King, struck at the Kavari formation with the coordinated precision of wolves taking down much larger prey. "Remember the lesson of the hunt," Carter told her squadron over the communication channel. "We do not try to overpower the enemy. We exhaust them, confuse them, and strike when they are weakest." The human ships moved like living creatures, flowing around the Kavari defenses with fluid grace. They attacked from unexpected angles, coordinated their strikes with surgical precision, and faded away before retaliation was possible. Each assault was perfectly timed to support the others, creating a synergistic effect that was greater than the sum of its parts. When one squadron drew Kavari fire, another would strike from a different direction. When the enemy tried to pursue, they would find themselves walking into carefully prepared ambushes. War Commander Thakvar watched his fleet dissolve around him with growing horror. These Deathworlders fought with a combination of tactical brilliance, technological competence, and sheer stubborn determination that his species had never encountered. "Sir, we have lost 60% of our fleet strength," reported Yethnal desperately. "Our biomechanical systems cannot adapt fast enough to counter their changing tactics." "Then we fight to the death," Thakvar declared, his mandibles clicking. With desperate resolve, the Kavari Empire does not surrender. But even as he spoke the words, he knew they were meaningless. His forces were not just losing, they were being systematically dismantled by an enemy that seemed to view warfare as a form of art. Captain Danny Rodriguez, now commanding a joint human coalition task force, coordinated the final assault with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. His tactical display showed the Kavari formation breaking apart under coordinated pressure from multiple directions. "All units, they are trying to form a defensive sphere around their command ships," he announced. "Execute breakthrough pattern. Omega. Hit them where they are strongest and show them that there is no safe place to hide." The human response was immediate and devastating. Instead of avoiding the heavily defended core of the Kavari formation, they attacked it directly. But they did not charge in blindly. Every ship had a specific role. Every weapon had a designated target. Every movement was calculated to support the overall strategy. Lieutenant Colonel Lisa Grant, monitoring the battle from her position aboard, Admiral Hayes' flagship, watched the tactical display with professional admiration. "They are fighting like they have trained together for years," she observed. "Coalition crews are following human tactical doctrine as if they were born to it." Hayes nodded grimly. "Fear is a powerful teacher, and faced with extinction even, the most peaceful species can learn to fight." The coalition ships, once timid and defensive, now moved with aggressive purpose. They had learned from their human allies that sometimes the best way to protect something was to destroy the threat completely. Captains like Robert Chen, commanding the coalition vessel Harmony's Edge, led their crews in coordinated strikes that would have been impossible just weeks before. The ship's crew, composed of peaceful Centaurians who had never fired a weapon in anger, now operated their guns with deadly efficiency. "Target their command structure," Chen ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Cut off their ability to coordinate, and they become just individual ships." The strategy worked perfectly. As the Kavari command ships were destroyed or disabled, their remaining forces lost coordination completely. Individual war machines began fighting desperately but independently, making them easy targets for the coordinated human coalition assault. War Commander Vekfar felt his flagship shudder as another salvo of human kinetic penetrators punched through his shields and armor. His biomechanical systems tried frantically to adapt, but the humans changed their attack patterns faster than evolution could keep up. "Sir, all our escort vessels are destroyed," Yethnal reported, his voice barely audible above the sound of failing systems. "We are alone." Dekvar looked around his ruined bridge and realized that his empire's reign of terror was over. These humans had not just defeated his fleet. They had demonstrated something far more dangerous. They could teach other species to be like them. "Send a final transmission to High Command," he ordered, as his ship's life support systems began to fail. "Tell them the truth about these Deathworlders." His last message was brief but clear. Do not engage the human species. They do not fight to win territory or resources. They fight to survive, and they have made survival into an art form. They turn warfare into evolution, and they evolve faster than we can adapt. Avoid all contact with Earth and its colonies. This is not a military recommendation. It is a warning for the survival of our species. The battle ended not with a single decisive moment, but with the gradual realization that there were no more Kavari ships left to fight. The human victory was complete, but Admiral Hayes took no satisfaction in it. She had seen what her species was capable of when pushed to extremes, and it was both magnificent and terrifying. Humans had not evolved to be conquerors or destroyers. They had evolved to be survivors. That made them something far more dangerous. In the aftermath, as coalition worlds celebrated their liberation, the galaxy began to understand what they had unleashed. Humanity had not just won a military victory, they had demonstrated that some species were forged by their worlds into something that transcended normal military doctrine. The humans returned to their ships and began the journey back to Earth, leaving behind a galaxy that would never again underestimate the creatures that emerged from Deathworlds. The Coalition had gained powerful allies, but they had also learned why some species were better left alone. As Captain Rodriguez prepared his final report, he reflected on the campaign with characteristic human pragmatism. "We did not win because we were stronger or smarter. We won because our world taught us that the only unacceptable outcome is giving up. The galaxy would remember that lesson for centuries to come. The Deathworlders had awakened, and the universe had learned what happens when evolution creates the perfect predator.